They told her not to touch it, not the piano, not the bench, not the sacred ground beneath the spotlight. Keep her away from the Steinway, someone snapped. She's blind, she'll scratch the lacquer. And just like that, in a room, designed for reverence, a hush fell. Not the kind earned through music, but the kind that follows shame spoken too loud. Her name was Elara Quinn, 17 years old, blind since the age of 2. No last name etched in legacy. No patron. No mentor. Only a white cane, a tattered backpack, and a silence deeper than the one they tried to bury her in. This wasn't a talent show. It was the Holloway International Showcase, hosted in a concert hall that smelled like leather-bound applause and inherited expectations. Only 10 performers were allowed. 9 had agents. 1 had wandered in through a side door. The voice that cut through her belonged to Julian Armand, a name that belonged in gold foil. He was the closing act. A man whose fingers were insured, whose interviews included phrases like sonic genius, and who referred to his own playing as divine sculpture. He saw Elara with her hand outstretched, tracing the curve of the Steinway's polished frame like a blind girl learning the shape of a star. Julian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply scoffed, turned to the event organizer and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Get her off my stage. This isn't a charity recital." The sound that followed wasn't applause. It wasn't protest either. It was silence. The heavy, shame-stained kind. Elara didn't cry, didn't speak, didn't flinch. She bowed her head slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, as if saying, "I hear you, but I am not yours." A security guard, unsure whether to step in or step back, stood frozen near the curtain. His phone, half holstered in his chest pocket, accidentally pressed record. And that moment, that still frame of humiliation, would become the spark of something the world never saw coming, because what happened next wasn't a breakdown. It was a beginning. The concert coordinator tried to usher Elara off stage gently, whispering something about timing and insurance policies. She nodded, stepped away, but she didn't leave. She sat cross-legged at the edge of the auditorium, just behind the curtains, listening. She always listened. 2 years earlier, Elara had found her way into the back corners of the Summit Conservatory in Vermont, not as a student but as a volunteer. Her job was to clean the rehearsal rooms, scrub the piano pedals, polish the brass on the music stands. They never gave her access to classes, but no one barred her from the walls. And sound, unlike doors, doesn't lock. She memorized compositions, not by reading them but by feeling them, hands hovering over vibrating keys, breathing in tempo, swallowing silence. Every night after the custodians left, she'd sneak into the storage room and trace finger patterns on an unplugged keyboard, the kind used for tuning exams, silent but real in her hands. And one night, the old janitor caught her. His name was Mr. Lyle. He didn't scold her. He sat beside her. He tapped rhythm into her palm. "You know what I hear?" he said. She tilted her head. "I hear someone who was supposed to be music," before the world interrupted. That's how it began. Not with lessons, with listening. And now, 2 years later, the world was about to listen back. Not because she asked, because they had no choice, not yet, but soon, because that phone accidentally recording backstage didn't stop. It captured the moment she stood up and stepped back toward the Steinway. The organizer tried to stop her, but the director, a woman named Isolde Carmichael, who had once been silenced for playing jazz at her conservatory audition, watched Elara's movement. Something about the way she walked, not confidently, but honestly, and she nodded. Let her play. No announcement, no mic, just a girl who had been mocked for touching keys, now about to touch the world. There was no spotlight, just the soft groan of a bench being pulled out, just the silence of a room holding its breath. Elara didn't announce her piece. She didn't ask permission, she simply sat, one hand resting in her lap, the other hovering inches above the keys like a prayer, unsure whether it would be answered. Julian Armand, standing 3 rows back with a flute of water and an ego bruised by inconvenience, raised an eyebrow. "She doesn't even have sheet music," he muttered. "Exactly," whispered the girl beside him. He didn't hear her. Elara inhaled, not loudly, just enough to say, "This is mine now." Then she played. Not something recognizable, Not a Chopin nocturne or a Rachmaninoff prelude. No composer had written what she played, because what she played wasn't written. It was remembered. The first note was hesitant. A middle C played so gently it barely existed. It wasn't impressive. It was honest. The next few notes climbed like someone learning to walk again. A melody searching for its feet. A rhythm that stumbled, then found itself in the dark, and then it breathed. Her left hand joined in, pulsing low and slow like a heartbeat, remembering it still had something worth beating for. The audience, unsure if this was a warm-up or a breakdown, sat utterly still, because something was happening. The sound wasn't flawless, but it was true. It wavered. It mourned. It confessed things that words had been too afraid to say. By the fourth bar, even the ushers had stopped walking. Even the chandeliers felt quieter. And Julian? He folded his arms, but his eyes didn't blink. Elara shifted forward slightly, letting the melody bloom into something larger. It moved like grief, slow and wide, but it ended in something unexpected. A laugh. Yes, a laugh in music. 3 high notes, quick, light, teasing. Like remembering a joke your mother once told before the accident. The audience couldn't name the feeling, but they knew it. One man in the second row tilted forward. A woman beside him held her breath with both hands. And that's when the video, still, recording from the guard's phone, caught something no one could have planned. Julian, his hand twitching once, then again. A finger, tapping his thigh. In rhythm. He hadn't even noticed. And Elara, she kept playing. The melody broke, rebuilt, shifted, changed tempo entirely. Now it galloped, like a child running downhill barefoot. The left hand chased, the right soared. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't pretty, it was alive. And then, silence. No resolution, no final chord, just her hands floating above the keys like ghosts unsure where to go. And she whispered, that was called breathing. The room didn't clap. Not yet, because clapping would have shattered something sacred. Instead, one sound broke through. A sob, low, real. Somewhere near the back, a woman covered her mouth and wept. No one asked why. They didn't need to. Elara stood, gently closed the fallboard over the keys, turned, bowed, then walked off stage the same way she entered. Silent, unapologetic. Julian stood motionless. The same man who had said, "Get her off my stage," now watching the world forget he existed. For her, that night the video hit the internet. At first, just a few hundred views, then 1,000, then 1,000,000, and the caption said only, "Blind girl silences concert hall with one song." But it wasn't the song that silenced them. It was the truth in her fingers. And in that moment, the world didn't care how old she was, what her resume said, or whether she ever played Carnegie. They just wanted to hear her again. And Elara? She was already gone, back into the quiet, where her best songs always began. By sunrise, the concert hall had returned to its usual shape. Polished floors, program pamphlets scattered like wilted flowers, staff sweeping away the night like it had been ordinary. But something had changed. People who had been there didn't speak about the show. They spoke about her, the girl who didn't belong, but played like she was the only one who did. Elara Quinn. The name wasn't printed on any program. She had no official slot. But by morning, it was the only name people remembered. She didn't wait for praise. She didn't stay to explain. She left the way she always had, quietly, through a door no one else noticed. She boarded the 5:15 a.m. train heading north, her cane folded and resting in her lap. No one recognized her. A man beside her glanced at the calluses on her fingers and assumed she was a laborer. A woman across the aisle offered a pitiful look, as if blindness was a sorrow to be cured. Elara didn't flinch. She just pressed her palm against the window and let the rhythm of the tracks fill her bones like a lullaby she had once forgotten. She didn't know, yet, that the world was following her. That overnight, a cellist in Berlin had slowed down the video and played her melody back, note for note, or that a music theory professor in Atlanta had uploaded a 14-minute breakdown of her playing, captioned, "The most emotionally precise performance I've ever heard," or that Julian Armand had canceled his upcoming tour because he couldn't explain what happened to him, because after 30 years of mastery, he didn't know how to answer the question he kept asking himself, Why did I feel more in those 4 minutes than I have in the last 4 decades? At the next station, Elara stepped off. She had no hotel, no plans, just a folded note in her coat pocket. A message from Mr. Lyle, the janitor who'd once taught her how to listen for tempo in the floorboards. He'd written from a place called Hawthorne Ridge, a forgotten town stitched between two highways, known for nothing except a retired music teacher who taught lessons for free in a church basement. Elara hadn't spoken to Mr. Lyle in months, but the letter said, "I've got a room, and an upright piano that's only a little out of tune. Come breathe here a while." So she did. She walked into Hawthorne Ridge like a shadow drawn by sound, a small girl in an oversized coat, and when she opened the church basement door, the warmth hit her first, then the silence. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. There was no stage, no chandeliers, no applause, just 7 students in winter boots, tuning their ears to a piano that hadn't been tuned in 10 years. Elara sat, not to teach, to listen. She ran her fingers along the edge of the old upright, felt the cracks, the wood swelling from seasons of heat and sorrow, and she smiled. "I think this piano remembers," she said. The students looked at her like a ghost had walked in. They'd all seen the video. They'd all whispered her name, but she didn't. Act like someone famous, she asked them questions, not about their skills, but about their memories. What sound makes you feel safe? What noise did your grandmother make when she cooked? What rhythm does your sadness follow? They didn't understand at first, but then they began to answer. One tapped the pattern of their dog's bark. Another hummed the clatter of dishes during their parents' arguments. A third just cried, and Elara said nothing. She took their sounds, and she turned them into music. Together they wrote a piece with no title, no signature, no fame, just sound that belonged to them. Meanwhile, the world hunted. Articles, interviews, talk show invitations. Headlines screamed, "Blind girl vanishes." After viral concert. The note that changed everything, but where is she? Even Julian spoke. A brief broken comment outside his Manhattan studio. She reminded me why I started, and why I stopped. But Elara didn't answer. She played for the people who couldn't find her. Not because she was hiding, but because they never looked in places that didn't echo. She played for the bruised, the quiet, the ones who'd been told to wait their turn, and then were never called. And in doing so, she became more than a performance. She became a permission to speak, to feel, to exist. The first offer came in a gold envelope, sent by private courier, embossed with the seal of Marionette Records, one of the largest classical labels in the world. The letter was handwritten, almost respectful. "Ms. Quinn, we believe your voice is essential to the future of modern composition. We are prepared to offer a global recording contract, full creative control, and a debut performance at the Louvre." They had no idea who she was. If they did, they wouldn't have called it her voice because Elara didn't sing. She listened. She didn't respond to the letter, but she folded it and placed it inside a wooden box at the foot of the Hawthorne Ridge piano. By the end of the week, the box was full, 7 offers, all promising the same thing: stages, headlines, legacy. But legacy had never fed her. Legacy had never held her hand in the dark. Meanwhile, someone else came looking for her. Julian Armand. He arrived at Hawthorne Ridge in silence. No entourage, no scarf, no ego. Just an old man with haunted eyes and a suitcase full of questions he didn't know how to ask. He didn't go to the church first. He went to the train station. He sat on the same bench Elara had once passed through, waited for something he couldn't name. After a full day of silence, someone tapped his shoulder. A little girl, maybe 9, dirt on her cheeks, and a half-eaten cookie in one hand. She looked at him like she was reading a book he didn't know he'd written. "You're the man who told her to leave," she said. He didn't answer. "She played for me," the girl added. "She made a song out of my mom's laugh." Julian blinked. "She remembered your mother's laugh?" "No," the girl said. "She found it." And just like that, Julian realized he had never found anything. He had performed greatness. She had become it. Later that night, he made his way to the church. The basement lights were dim. The piano was still cracked. And there she was, Elara, sitting cross-legged beside a boy learning how to play with only his left hand. She didn't see Julian, but she felt him. His breath changed the shape of the room. "You came?" she said simply, not turning. Julian stood in the doorway. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. "I thought I understood music," he finally said. "I spent decades sculpting it, owning it, earning it." She nodded gently. "And now? I don't know anymore." "That's a good place to start." She offered him a seat. He sat, watched, listened. The boy played 2 wrong notes, then a right one, then stopped. Julian opened his mouth, probably to correct him, but Elara shook her head. "He's not playing the song," she whispered. "He's playing himself." And Julian finally heard it, not perfection, but presence. That week, something shifted in him. He stayed, not to teach, to unlearn. He asked Elara questions about rhythm, about silence, about why she never played the same song twice, and she asked him one question in return. "When did you stop making music for healing and start using it to prove you were allowed in the EO room?" Julian didn't answer. He just closed his eyes and wept. The video started again. Not from press, not from viral campaigns, from townspeople. Grainy phone clips. Elara playing with a 5-year-old girl using pots and spoons. A piece performed in the back of a diner for a grieving cook who'd lost his brother. An impromptu melody at a laundromat for a woman folding her divorce papers into clean shirts. They weren't concerts. They were witnessings. Every note said, "I see you, even if you've been forgotten." And the world began to follow. Not through spotlight, through whispers. Back in New York, a journalist tried to write a think piece titled, "Is Elara Quinn Destroying Classical Tradition?" He never published it, because halfway through his daughter sat beside him and said, "She made me cry without saying a word." In Hawthorne Ridge, winter crept in. Snow muffled the rooftops. Breath became visible. And still, the music didn't stop. Elara taught the children how to compose from silence. Julian taught them how to hold a note like it carried someone's last. For in the town, once forgotten, became a symphony. People came not to watch, but to feel. One night, Elara stood outside in the snowfall, her cane in one hand, a wooden flute in the other. Julian approached her quietly. "I think I want to learn how to listen again," he said. Elara smiled. "You already started," she whispered, and then she played. Not for him, for the snow. They didn't advertise the winter concert. No posters, no website. Just word of mouth passed gently between hands like folded paper in church. By the time it happened, the church basement in Hawthorne Ridge was too small. People came anyway. Some stood outside in the snow. Others pressed ears to windows. A few sat in their cars with the doors open, hoping sound would travel far enough to reach their regrets. Elara didn't dress for the occasion. She wore the same boots she'd arrived in, same threadbare scarf. But when she stepped to the piano, the room bowed without moving. Julian Armand sat in the 3rd row, his notebook open, blank page trembling in his lap. Mr. Lyle stood in the back, eyes misted, remembering the first night he saw her trace sonatas into air like ghost music. And at the front, the children, all of them, sitting cross-legged, silent, listening the way no adult ever teaches, with their entire soul. Elara placed her hands on the keys, but she didn't play. She turned to the crowd, tilted her head, and asked a question no one expected. "Do you remember the first sound you loved?" The room didn't answer, but something shifted. A woman near the aisle clutched her coat tighter. A man closed his eyes. A teenager reached for his grandfather's hand. Elara smiled, just barely, and began. The music had no structure. It wasn't a song. It was a story. A storm of emotions spun into sound. It began with 2 quiet notes, separated by silence. A child walking alone down a hallway. Then 3 quick chords, laughter in the next room. A single high note repeated, an unanswered question. Then silence again. But this silence wasn't empty. It was filled with waiting. And in that waiting, something bloomed. A chord that sounded like a window being opened after years of dust. A scale that climbed like a person reaching for forgiveness. A tremble that whispered, "I'm still here." The audience didn't applaud. They didn't dare. They remembered. Each note pulled something from the basement of their lives. Grief that never found air. Love that was never spoken. Hope that had curled into silence and waited. Waited for this. Elara leaned into the final sequence, minor, unresolved, human, and when she let go of the last note, the room didn't breathe. Not yet, because no one wanted to fill the space that sound had just carved open in their chest. Later, outside, someone asked Julian what he thought of the piece. He didn't call it genius, didn't praise the technique. He just said she gave them back something they lost. By morning, the performance had already spread, not through clicks or headlines, through voice, spoken, passed. A woman called her sister and cried. A music teacher rewrote their entire syllabus. No more recitals, only truth. A father picked up the cello he hadn't touched since his son died. They all used the same phrase. It felt like the piano remembered me. But then something happened Elara never saw coming. A journalist, anonymous, leaked a confidential letter from Marionette Records. They'd written a full internal proposal. Rebrand Elara Quinn as The Sound of Redemption TM. Blind. Brilliant. Reclusive. Pitch her as a symbol of healing in fractured times, emotional currency, musical purity, total brand potential. They attached a launch plan, photoshopped mock-ups, streaming projections. Not one mention of the girl, only what she could be sold for. The world reacted like it had found a crack in stained glass. Some were furious. Some shrugged. Some said, "That's just how the world works." But one comment, buried in a thread, struck deeper than all the outrage. "You cannot own someone who plays for ghosts." Back in Hawthorne Ridge, Elara packed quietly. Not because she was angry, because the music had already told her it was time to go. She left no forwarding address. Just a note on the piano. "When silence returns, play it like you mean it." Julian watched her go. Didn't try to stop her. Instead, he returned to the piano, sat where she once sat, and played a single note. It wasn't beautiful, but it was brave. And that's how they knew she'd been there. Not because of the sound, because of the permission. By evening, people started arriving again. No performer, no promise, just an open bench. And one by one, they played, not for applause, not to impress, to feel, to heal, to listen. They didn't need Elara anymore, because she had taught them how to begin without her. Snow melted into spring, and with it, the last echoes of Elara Quinn's name began to fade. Not because the world forgot her, but because the world no longer needed to remember her to still be changed by her. She had become something else. A memory? A method? No, a movement. In a small town in Oregon, a retired Marine who'd lost his hearing in war began teaching rhythm to kids through vibration boards. In a Bronx subway, two teenage girls performed an original melody built from heartbeat recordings of their late grandmother. In the south of France, an abandoned chapel became a listening room. No music allowed, only ambient silence and story. No one said Elara's name, but her fingerprints were on everything. Julian Armand now taught at Eastbridge Conservatory. Yes, that Eastbridge. The same institution that once told Elara she wasn't worth a bench. Now, it had a new wing. The room of sound without sight. There were no chairs, no sheet music. Just one rule etched into the glass. If you've never been heard, this space was built for you. Julian no longer wore suits. He no longer corrected wrong notes. He asked one question at the start of every session. What part of your life are you playing from today? Sometimes students didn't answer. Sometimes they just started. One of those students, a boy named Theo, played with his eyes closed. He'd never met Elara, but once during class he said, "I had a dream that someone played beside me, without sound, but I still felt every note." Julian smiled. He didn't tell him she used to say the same thing. And what of Elara? She had vanished, at least publicly. No contracts, no concerts. No interviews, but not gone. People began leaving small chalk marks in towns they thought she'd passed through. A circle with a single dot in the center. An ear. A sign. Some said they heard her in churches. Others swore she was behind a veil at a music therapy session in Nairobi. A few believed she had passed through hospice centers playing only for the dying. Final songs no one else would ever hear. There were no photos, only ripples, but always the same story. She didn't speak. She just listened. And then I knew what sound was. In a remote mountain village in Vermont, a mother tucked her daughter in at night. The child was born deaf. She asked, "What does music feel like?" The mother didn't know how to answer. So she reached for an old tape recorder passed from a friend of a friend of a stranger who once swore they knew a girl named Elara Quinn. She played the tape. No lyrics, no rhythm, just one soft melody. Broken, incomplete. But the child smiled, said, "That sounds like dreaming," and slept, and far from all of them. In a quiet desert, beneath stars that hadn't been named, a woman sat with a wooden flute in her lap, a silver bell on her wrist, and the wind at her back. She didn't need stages anymore. The world was the stage now, and when she played, softly, slowly, without ceremony, she knew no one would hear it. Not today, but someone, somewhere, would one day feel it. In a hospital, a back alley, a classroom, a cracked piano in a dusty church. They'd sit, they'd play, and they'd realize, this sound was waiting for me. And that is what Elara Quinn left behind. Not a catalog, not a brand, not applause, but a permission so deep it didn't need to be spoken. If you feel forgotten, if your sound has no name, if silence is the only language you've ever trusted, play anyway. Because music isn't what makes us heard, it's what makes us human. And somewhere, maybe just beyond the noise of this world, a blind girl with a cracked piano is still playing, still listening, still waiting for you to begin.